there it goes. So, when I came across this guest's work, I thought this must be what like Worf on Star Trek would feel like if it turned out there was another Klingon in the Federation and he's like bumped into her at like the dining hall at the star base or something. So anyways, let's get her on. Nina, my friend, you are on the air.
Hey, wonderful. Thanks, Matt. So this is Nina Griffin. Hi, everyone. And I was just laughing. I was on mute here, but description of apparently I have found my astrology twin over here, astrology/lawyer. So I guess the question then is where is your Mars? If there's the red hair situation and you're a lawyer, the odds are good that Mars might be prominent in your chart since you probably aren't averse to a lively discussion or conflict. So that's something to think about.
You're very good. Now, folks, she has almost nailed it now, not directly, but you've come very, very close. My moon is in Aries, right precisely on the midheaven.
Wow.
And South Node is in Aries on 0 degrees Aries in the 9th. Wow. So my past, I don't necessarily believe in past lives as a physical reality, but it is a metaphor. The South Node, metaphoric past lives. So the point is bringing in a lot of Aries energy. And what about yourself? Are you? Not everybody's okay with disclosing their chart information, but. Is Aries?
Yeah, I don't really mind.
Okay.
It's always sort of amusing, I think. No, I actually have no Aries, but I have Scorpio rising. So that's at least in traditional astrology, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about today. That's ruled by Mars before Pluto came along. And the other thing is that Mars in my chart is conjunct Mercury. They're both in Pisces, though, which is a water sign. So I don't think it's as prominent as for you, but I guess it's enough that it, it informs my speech and interests and, probably like the way I think and act. Since Mercury has a lot to do with how we perceive things and how we organize information. So,
do you have the planet of communication in the sign of that's Mercury for folks who are listening, in the sign of the poet and the psychic, which is Pisces, but it's conjunct Mars, which is the warrior. So how does this work out for you?
Yeah, exactly. Well, this is probably why I have my two occupations, right?
Yeah.
That's why I'm an attorney, but at the same time, obviously I enjoy astrology and I enjoy learning about the occult and just things like that. So how that works, I think it's actually a good combination for the legal practice. I think a lot of people have this image of lawyers as being very aggressive and in your face, and I think there is, not to say that's not a reality, but the truth is that if you're like myself and you do a lot of, say, negotiation, you actually want to come across in a very low-key, mellow kind of way, even if you have certain principles that you adhere to, because, let's face it, people are much more responsive to that. So.
The other thing is, I would think with the Pisces is very Scorpio rising and Pisces with all the Pisces influence there is very intuitive, and so you could pick up on things as both, and this would go with clients, with adversaries, and with people in the astrology. If you're consulting with people for astrological consultations, you can kind of sense, are they disclosing the entire story, or what? They're kind of something's up. You can get an emotional impression, and then go look for if there's any facts to necessarily support that.
Yeah, I think intuition is always helpful in the counseling professions, and let's face it, both of my professions are counseling professions. So
now, there's something I've been waiting. I've been doing this show for a year, and I've been waiting to say it, and I think finally I'm going to get a chance to say it, which is this. Okay. And you probably have some idea with that Mercury, Mars, and Pisces. You know what I'm going to say. You want the truth about your Saturn transit? You can't handle the truth about your Saturn transit.
That is so true.
Oh my God, I've been waiting forever.
Right.
Thank you so much for giving me that
You're
opportunity.
Very welcome. Yeah, I'm happy to do it.
Do we also want to have the Hastings-Stanford battle?
No,
I'm just kidding.
It's in Pisces. I'm like, I don't really do battle. No. That's not really what I do. Yeah. But it's fine. Yeah.
She does do battle. She just does it very. She'll slip in on the Scorpio rising with all that Pisces. She'll slip in by the cover of darkness, and you won't even know what hits you.
Battle. Right. Yeah.
So actually, let's get what people have heard enough about me, but you're how you got from what got you interested in astrology? Because most people, to me, it makes perfect sense. Okay, but like you, I'm one of the few other Klingons in Starfleet here. I don't know if you're into Star Trek or not, but if not, that probably made no sense.
I'm familiar with it, but I wouldn't exactly call myself a Trekkie.
Okay.
How about that?
But so people they always go to me, they think of astrology as intuitive and think of being an attorney as so like argumentative and analytical. And I always explain, no, they're actually kind of similar. You're both engaging in analysis and counseling, and they both involve what in the old days, very, very old days, would have been shamanic stuff, information that the average person doesn't have access to, whether it's astrological info or legal info. So to me, it makes perfect sense that the two would coincide, but obviously that most people don't get that. So how did you go from? How did you get into astrology, and how does that either overlap or deviate from your legal career?
That's a really good question. Well, I would have to say that I am probably more accurately described as an astrologer who became an attorney rather than vice versa, because I've been interested in astrology since about the age of 10 or 11, and obviously I became an attorney somewhat after that. So it's really something I've always been really interested in people and how they thought. And when I was, sort of high school age and thinking about careers, I always thought I wanted to be a psychiatrist, but then I realized that nowadays that tends to entail mostly prescribing drugs, which was really not what I was that interested in. And I saw myself, more as like a future Carl Jung or something like that. But I think that time perhaps has passed. So, I was always very interested in sort of understanding what made people tick, and also how to sort of transform their current reality into something better and more constructive for them. And I feel that actually both astrology and the law allow you to do that. In the law, you usually do that. You can do it on a number of levels. I work in the corporate world, and so I do contracts and negotiations, things like that. But again, it's about, sort of making something out of nothing. I mean, it's almost in some ways a magical act. And as an astrologer, it's similar, right? You're working with people. Of course, there's more like a counseling conversation that you're having, and hopefully you're solve problems. So really, it is very similar, and I agree that there is, I think, a strong mercurial component to that a lot of people in both professions will have a strong Mercury that can handle this level of analysis and probably likes to talk to people.
Yeah, I have Mercury conjunct Jupiter in Cancer in the 12th. So, let's see. Actually, what's your Sun Moon combo? If you don't mind me asking.
Yeah, I don't mind at all. I'm Sun Aquarius and Moon in Taurus.
Aquarius Taurus. Because I have this really cool book here, Sun Sign Moon Sign by Susie and Charles Harvey. And I always like to look. They have these metaphoric images for each of the Sun Moon combinations.
Yeah. Look up mine.
Oh yeah, and 95% of the time it like works really well, and then there's always that 5% where the person's like, that doesn't describe me at all. I'm not like that. Which means they totally are like that.
Right, exactly. Like especially when they're denying it, you're never wrong.
Oh man, this is totally you. All right, a country girl seeks a conventional life with an unconventional young man in the big city.
So, that is so funny. I'll tell my husband that. Yeah. I'm sure he'll be amused.
And then, there's another one. The resident caretaker of a New Age community sips her bourgeois as she systematically does the year's accounts. So you've got
I already do all that stuff. So, I'm not exactly a caretaker of a New Age community, though sometimes it sure feels like it.
But both of those images, though, are about, you've got the kind of the, for lack of a better word, New Age stuff. Astrology is not New Age, as we'll talk about. But you've got the caretaker of the New Age thing, so that's like the astrology component, and then doing the accounts is like the legal kind of, what people think of as the more on the legal side of things. So if you want, we can look up your husband also if you're curious.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
Yeah, what's his?
He's actually double Virgo, so Sun and Moon in Virgo.
Oh, the Cal Ripken Jr. is the Iron Man who didn't miss a day of work for 16 years. And oil, I did the chart for the first commercial oil strike, and it was Sun in Virgo, Moon in Virgo, which is that I'll maybe email that to you because that's a thing I used to write about oil for a living.
Oh, so, fascinating. Were you like an analyst or?
No, I ran the most popular peak oil site on the internet.
No way.
Yeah, lifeaftertheoilcrash.net.
Hey, that's great.
So I looked up the chart for oil based on the first commercial oil strike, and Pluto's just about to go over its ascendant, which is kind of interesting. And then also for the electrical grid, based on when they flipped the switch at the first power station in New York. And that was Virgo, Sun, Gemini, Moon. But anyway, so your husband. So Cal Ripken's a good one. A ballerina, or I guess he wouldn't be a ballerina, but
ballerino.
yeah, about a dancer practices alone in a room of mirrors and sensing his potential perfection, focuses on his flaws, and begins again.
Wow, interesting.
A well-oiled printing machine hums away, producing perfectly bound copies of the Layman's Guide to Essential Nutrients.
Wow.
And so very like I use.
That's interesting. I'll tell you in a sec why, but go ahead.
Oh, just it's like very like Lance Armstrong is that combination.
Uh-huh.
And aside from the controversy, if you think about a well-oiled printing machine humming away, a bicyclist just humming away on his bicycle, So yeah.
What I was going to say is, so my husband is a physician and he does radiation, so he works with people who have cancer. But that's very interesting because there's like the imagery of the machine, but then also like in combination with some kind of therapeutic thing, right? Which is what they're just printing.
And also of course Lance Armstrong,
Well, yeah, right.
It gets really freaky actually. Some of these combos.
Absolutely.
The other thing is a lot of times I was told that when somebody has a sun moon in the same sign, they will often express as like the opposite sign. So it's like a compensation mechanism where you have so much in one sign that it kicks over to the opposite sign. And Pisces radiation is kind of Piscean in that it's scorpionic, but it's kind of like invisible. And if it's in the right dose, it can be good. But if it's in the wrong dose, it can be poison.
Right. That's very true. Yeah.
God, so interesting. Anyway, so I love checking that one, and I also like thinking about like what would be the potential less pleasant components. Like they're going to give the nice components of that. They're going to come up with
right, absolutely.
And then it's like, yeah. So anyway, we can come back to this later if you want. But do you know what's the sun and the moon in today? I didn't check. I should know.
Oh,
and it's Virgo sun and
Virgo sun and Taurus moon.
Oh, okay. So this would.
That's right.
This would also be this one I actually know by heart, but I'll go ahead and read it. This would also be, I guess, the initiation of whatever, like our, colleagueship. So, so interesting. A nun finishes washing up in the refectory and then takes the keys to her Bentley and drives off to a new art exhibit. Okay, I like the Bentley.
Oh, that is so funny. I love that.
Yeah, that's a cool one. So, and who's a famous person? Mother Teresa, that's cool. Greta Garbo.
oh yeah, absolutely.
So anyhow, enough with that. So folks, any of you, I guess today would be out there for folks listening. If you're down in West Sonoma County, I don't think there's a Bentley dealership around there. But maybe if you're going to buy like a used station wagon, a nice used station wagon for your Bovinian, because Nina, you're here on Bovinian Radio, our icon is the actually, you know what? Hold on a moment here. We'll get our mascot. I'll bring our mascot over. Where's the other mascot? Hold on. Bessie and Bossy, and Bessie's not around. Well, okay, Bossy, you go. There you go. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. So anyhow, all right. Traditional. You are what is known as a traditional astrologer. So perhaps you could explain to people what is a traditional. Of course, you said Taurus. Was it Aquarius Taurus?
Exactly.
Of course, yeah. Taurus is traditional, and Aquarius a little untraditional. So, what is a traditional astrologer?
Right. So, it's one of those things that people tend to label themselves, but I think everybody recognizes it's sort of an imperfect label. And basically, what that usually means is that you tend to look at astrology and practice astrology thought or known to have been practiced before the Enlightenment, so say before the year 1700. And this can encompass a huge range of types of practices because you can have people who are trying to use what we now know as the Hellenistic, the Greek methods, which were used probably around the 1st century AD, or, we don't know all the practices of that time, but that is something that, there's a large group of people who sort of harken back to some of the texts that have been begun to be translated out of Greek. Me personally, I tend to look at more medieval and Renaissance methods, so a little bit more recent. And as far as traditional astrology goes, I guess we're sort of like we're the babies, we're the most recent in a sense. And the reason that I got interested in these traditional methods is because they were very concrete, which I guess maybe my Taurus moon, which likes things to be very practical and applicable, was very attracted to that. But at the same time, there is also there were just a lot of techniques developed, hundreds or even thousands of years ago, that are not just about natal astrology, which is kind of the focus of the 20th century styles, but a lot of really interesting methodologies, for example, weather prediction, a lot of political forecasting. Because astrology was used in so many different areas of life, they just developed all these really interesting methods that are applicable even today that perhaps have fallen by the wayside with some of the emergence of the more psychotherapeutic approach to astrology. So that, in a nutshell, is why I'm interested in it.
Yeah, and you figure if it's been around for that long, I have this general thing. And it doesn't apply across the board, of course, because but if something's been around for thousands of years, there's got to be something going for it,
Yeah,
like,
I totally agree.
Like yoga or the Kama Sutra or whatever. It's like, well, not that doesn't automatically mean it's awesome, but it's worth looking into,
It's been tested out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's sort of been my sense as well. Go ahead.
So with the we mentioned of course talking about the Uranus-Pluto years, which is like, astrologers, we've been talking about this ad nauseum, but for folks listening, they have particularly probably in the last year and a half. I date the years of the Uranus-Pluto starting with Fukushima. Basically, it was like the unofficial start, and I think people are maybe more willing or interested in listening. So, what is the Uranus-Pluto years, and does this connect to why people seem to be all losing their minds?
Well, I feel like people losing their minds have been going on a lot longer than the Uranus-Pluto square, but I hear you.
Yeah, I did mention that in the first hour, that losing the mind is probably part of the human experience, but
it's not new.
it does seem to be more happening in a more demonstrative format in the last year and a half or so.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And my sense too, Matt, is that, like I said, as a traditionalist, we tend not to use the visible planets that you can't see with the naked eye. And of course, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto and asteroids all fall in that category. But I also believe that we should use whatever works. So that's the other thing I wanted to tell you about being a traditional astrologer, is that we shouldn't just stick our heads in and then it's like, well, new planets have been discovered. Let's figure out what they mean and how they can be used rather than just ignoring them altogether. The thing with the Uranus-Pluto square, I've spent a lot of time looking at, times when it was active before, and I know we've had a lot of articles and writings about that, trying to compare this to, I forget the exact years, but it was in the, I want to say, early to mid-1930s, which of course saw, the Great Global Depression and probably the biggest financial depression of our time, because it wasn't just the United States, but it affected, basically all other industrialized countries. And it's interesting because people, of course, were worried that this current financial crisis would have similar repercussions. And I think it did manifest similarly in the sense that even though, 2008 was a little bit before Uranus-Pluto came into an exact square, we really have been seeing a lot of the upheavals around the world, I think, in the last couple of years. And I wonder if a lot of situations and a lot of political situations that had been sort of stagnant and just humming along in their status quo, we've just seen so many dramatic changes in the Middle East and now in Europe with their response to the financial crisis and similar events.
Yeah, I read a thing the other day. Now with the number of people on food stamps, we got 300 million people in the country, 46 million on food stamps.
Wow.
Yeah, which means basically that number actually is kind of deceptive, because if you've got 46 million, that means 90 million are either on them, were on them, but maybe found some work that they don't need, enough work that they don't need them, or are about to go on them. So you got basically 1/3 of the country almost, or at least a quarter, 25% of the country, either on food stamps or just has been on them, or either on them or recently on them, and so it does kind of seem to be shaping up similar to the 1930s, and hopefully we can. I'm not too optimistic the country is getting its act together at the highest levels.
Right.
But what about are there things people can do, to at least on their own, in their own sphere to navigate some of this stuff in a
I
slightly
think it's
less
really
painful way?
hard. Yeah, I'm sort of looking at this from a perspective. Well, one of my interests as well is political astrology and sort of these long-term cycles that we seem to all go through as humanity does. And one of the things that I think is very emblematic of the Uranus-Pluto cycle is the ability to be flexible, but at the same time, it really forces you to be pragmatic where you may not have been. And I feel like that's actually especially true for our generation, whether you consider yourself X or Y. I know, I guess, being in one's early 30s sort of puts you on the cusp between the two. But I think there has been this real sense that, we can no longer count on the same kind of social benefits and certain things that maybe earlier generations have taken for granted. And so I think what it's forcing a lot of especially young people to do is really reconsider what their career options are. And it's a little bit unfortunate, right? I spoke about this in an earlier interview with the Astrology News Service where, I feel that's one of the reasons why maybe astrology isn't as prevalent maybe among young people as it was in, say, the 1960s. Because I feel like young people now have to focus on just really basic needs and making sure that they can put food on the table, whereas before, if the country's in a state of affluence, there's perhaps more time to explore and do things that aren't immediately profitable.
Yeah, there seems to be something dual is going on. On the one hand, there is I sense a increase in interest because people are, as the mainstream institutions have failed, they get interested in things that are on the fringe, but they don't necessarily have money for consults or books or whatever
Right.
because they have such huge debt loads and there's not really enough jobs. And as rough as things were in the 70s, you didn't have people graduating with the equivalent of 2, 3, 4, 5 years of income in debt, which is now actually kind of at least a year or two of income in debt is seems to be, I think, the average or the norm. So I think there's an increase in interest, but a decrease in the ability to finance that interest.
I think that's very true.
Yeah.
Exactly. And maybe I think that's actually very accurate. It's not even that people aren't interested, but it's sort of hard to, become maybe heavily into astrology if you can't afford to buy some books or take a course or the things that, people might normally take for granted.
So this is why the number of visits the astrology blogs are getting has probably gone through the ceiling, but that not necessarily the number of consults or products sold.
I think that's right. I agree. Yeah.
And maybe that'll shift. I don't know, but we are in the times we're in. So switching a little bit. Okay, Uranus, Pluto, or as I like to say, Uranus, Pluto, yours. So something a little more gentle. Fertility astrology. So is it possible if a couple wants to conceive children, can they use astrology to assist in that process?
Right. And this is something that I've been interested in for a while. Partly because a lot of questions I get have to do with children. People either, want more or they want their first child or what have you. And it's one of those things that actually has probably some of the best science behind it as far as astrology is concerned. There is some very well-known research going back, I think, to the 1950s from the former Czechoslovakia. And it often gets quoted in astrology books, or at least glossed, where basically the researcher, who was not an astrologer, but he was sort of open-minded, looked at the angle between a woman's sun and moon and at the natal, in the natal horoscope. And then they would look at the most fertile times based on when that angle repeats by transit. So that's, and apparently he had fantastic results in allowing people to conceive, at those times. At the same time, I was recently looking at some work around this, and apparently there are additional angles that are considered not only bad for conception, but they also can actually result in some disabilities or deformities in the baby. So there are certain actually people would be discouraged from trying to conceive. So anyway, that's a really long intro to saying, this is something I've been looking at for quite a while, and it seems to be just a perennial interest. And actually, I think that's one of the areas where a lot of people are interested in learning more, but they don't necessarily have the money to spend, which I guess my question would be, maybe is this the best time to have a baby? But
yeah, unfortunately, but the conscious mind seems the unconscious decides when.
when the right time is.
Yeah, it seems to. I've noticed people. When I first started noticing this was with people who write about the environment. They'll talk a lot about the need to reduce population, but then they end up having like 5 kids. And I'm like, you consciously can recognize the desire to for population need for population control, for lack of a better word. But your unconscious is doing its own thing. So
exactly, that's so true.
And I always thought it had something to do with once your book or website about population issues was popular enough. And then that's when you got married and had kids. I just noticed that with people. Yeah. So, but anyhow, so we're at the bottom of the hour. So what we're going to do is put you on hold for a couple minutes while I attend to some station business and get you, if you need to get a drink of water or if you have a client who